share, and action. Right. So as I said, so we've got here the process, the three ingredients, and one big myth. All right. So a little bit about myself. And I actually started my career designing gambling machines for the French mafia. So that's designing for addictive mechanics. So that's definitely about behavioral change. It's a very narrow kind of behavioral change, but it's the exact same models or frameworks that are used in, say, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube stories. I'd like to think, well, not like, I removed that word like, but I suspect LinkedIn is trying to use some very similar mechanics as well. And yeah, so that's one kind of type of behavioral change. But since then, and actually when the Interpol came and closed the company down, I then worked for the British government for a couple of years, and then I followed my passion, which is really in healthcare. This is where I'm really passionate about, and working. I've worked as a hospital researcher. So this was a university hospital. I worked in triage, which is, if you've ever seen like ER or any kind of TV show, it's always the emergency ward where the ambulances pulls off the bloody bodies and broken limbs. It's that. So I worked in a hospital in Barcelona for a while. And I've also worked with patient adherence. So taking things like taking your medications and diabetes and Alzheimer's. I've also worked in smoking cessation, lots of different categories in healthcare, which I'm hugely passionate about. And I don't know, maybe for some of you, if you've ever worked for any consultancies, maybe we've worked for similar consultancies and brands. So I've worked for IDEO, Design It, DMI, and Fjords. And if you work for consultancies, it doesn't take long before you pick up lots and lots of different logos along the way. But in fact, NASA was a really cool logo. It's one that actually Dr. BJ Fogg, which was one of my professors from Stanford, he actually gave me that client, which for me was huge. It was quite a boring job, I'll be honest, but working with engineers. But it was all about what I'm going to teach you today. But it's also about how we accelerate or automate behaviors, which is something the engineers wanted to do at NASA. Okay, so my background, so I'm also a university lecturer in consumer psychology and behavioral design. So I run 3-week full-time modules. I do that a couple of times a year, and as well as consulting for people. Okay, now, oh, all right. This is the foundational quote that I want to build today's masterclass on, which is design is really an act of communication, which means having this deep understanding of the person with whom the designer will be communicating. Now, I love this quote, and I think it's quite, I can really relate to it. I don't know if you've ever read any of Don Norman's work, things like, but I've got one of the books here somewhere. Oh yeah, The Design of Everyday Things, right? So Don Norman talks about this, and we look into UX or user experience. And I don't know about you, but a lot of people in design schools or even business schools where they're learning maybe innovation strategy and whatnot, they're learning a lot about processes. They're learning a lot about even software, oh, Figma this and blah, 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 that and AI. But where is the deep understanding of the person? This is like the classic void that we tend to find. And this is something that I'm very keen and passionate to change. And in fact, most of the times when big brands call me, it's normally to fill the gap. It's normally to fill the gap with the UX researchers, the designers, and maybe the marketing and strategy departments, because they're struggling to decode what it is they're actually looking at. And this brings me on to the next step, which is, where does this deep understanding even start from? Now, something I'm, particularly enjoy is the work by Robert Sapolsky. If you've ever come across any of his work, it's got a few books out now, but looking at it, the evolutionary perspective, right? How do we, for example, how do we even learn? How have we even evolved? And if we were to look at this image and say, well, what can I see here? What could be the possible behaviors that are at play and the possible motives behind those behaviors? So, okay, We've got a chimp. Looks like potentially using a tool that's in his mouth or in their mouth. Perhaps there's food. We know that chimps like to eat ants and things like that. So maybe there's ants in the bucket. That's a hypothesis. And then, but we also can see that there's some of those chimps look like they're waiting, some are observing. But we also know that there's this learning process. And if we were to just say for a minute, well, how do we learn and how have we evolved? Now, learning can be quite complex, but if you break it down and just say, look, let's just simplify it into its fundamental core blocks, what you'll notice is there are these basic stages. And when I talk about learning, like I say here, research, am I saying that the chimp or a 4-year-old child is consciously researching? Maybe, but they might not use the terminology research. Essentially, it's data in. So the data is coming in to the brain, then the brain is reflecting, right? Trying to make sense of the world around it. And then what commonly happens, but doesn't need to happen for learning, but commonly happens, is there's this experimentation phase. That experimentation phase allows the human being to sort of validate the hypothesis, right? And like I said, it doesn't matter if it's a 4-year-old child, banging a toy on something and listening to the sounds and seeing which object breaks first and learns and starts to learn about the world around them, or whether it's us as adults and having meetings with stakeholders or interviewing users or customers and collecting that data. But the thing I find, and you tell me, please put this in the chat, please tell me if you found differently. The thing I found the most in 27 years now of working in this industry is we do lots of research, right? And there's books on research. And there's like lots of different methods, from diaries to surveys to interviewing to whatever, right? There's 101 ways to research. And we do these projects, we collect all the data, but then people spend their weekend building out PowerPoints for their presentation on Monday, and that we call reflection. The decoding phase in the whole process, from my own experience, has always been far too short. Yet you've all heard the quote, by Albert Einstein, if I've only got 1 hour to solve a problem, I'll spend 55 minutes trying to understand the problem. The understanding isn't just collecting data. The understanding is reflection. What is it I'm looking at? What's really going on? And I've seen in innovation projects, just far too little time is dedicated to reflection. And you say, well, why? Well, from my experience and my understanding, working with professionals in UX, in service design, strategy, etc., they were never given the tools to really reflect. Creating an empathy map, I'm sorry, that's not really reflection. That's terrible. In fact, I refuse to use it. I used to use empathy maps until I got to the point going, what does this mean? What can we use this for? So we've understood that people say things and do things and they're not always aligned. Okay. And so what? What does this mean? What do we, and I think maybe in innovation, that's quite novel. But I think from psychology, like we kind of known this for a long time now, but it's like, yeah, okay, great. But we need to be able to do something with this. And so I just feel that it's not to the fault of people in innovation. They just have never been given those tools. The tools that people from the world of psychology, that's their entire toolbox, is this how to, reflecting, what is it we're looking at? So then that brings me on to the behavioral design process. Now, there are different processes out there, and I don't know about you guys, but on LinkedIn, especially last year, in the last quarter, the amount of LinkedIn blog posts where I've heard design thinking is dead, or we need design thinking 2.0, or Scrum is dead, or something else is dead, blah, 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 or UX is dead. And I go, well, let's just look at the process. We understand now the process of learning at its most simplistic form has these stages. Well, now let's look at the behavioral design process and say, well, hang on a minute. We've given them different names, but essentially they're the same three building blocks. Doesn't matter if it's agile design thinking or even the scientific method. It's this classic data in, reflection, and hopefully that, there's this experimentation or validation phase. Go and test your hypothesis. And so it can't die because this is how humans have evolved. We've evolved through learning. So design thinking is learning, innovation is learning, agile is learning. And when companies break down, it's because they've stopped learning. And you get these silos where people are learning in little silos and they've stopped learning as a team. But we look at the chimps and they're managed to learning as a team. Why can't we humans? So I think we've got a bit of work to do. By the way, these slides, I'll email them tomorrow morning or later on today. And so you'll have them. Feel free to share it, do what you like with them, post them, but this kind of slide is essentially sharing that at the core, you've got your customer or your patient, and you have this learning process that wraps around it. So everyone in your innovation team needs to put around it. And that for me is the behavioral design process. You can mix and match these because it's still the same three core ingredients. So behavioral design process is any of these mixtures that works for your team and the constraints that you're under. I tend to be a little bit more weighted in between design thinking and scientific method, just because of my background. Like spending a lot of time reflecting and creating hypotheses. I love this quote. The human mind does not run on logic, no more than a horse runs on petrol. I don't know if you know Rory Sutherland. Okay, he's more focused on marketing, and a lot of what he teaches and talks about is really focused on marketers or marketeers. And but essentially it's about understanding humans. And I think the first thing we do is we think, hang on a minute, we have a brief, we do our research, we over a weekend create our hypothesis or define the problem we're trying to solve. Monday morning, come present, start innovating after showing off our persona maps. And then suddenly it's build, create prototypes, frantic dash for prototypes, and saying, well, hang on. And these prototypes are all built on logic. Everyone's trying to be really logical. And I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm saying, yeah, but the person you're designing for is making decisions that if you ever learn about behavioral economics, you'll suddenly realize is insanely irrational. In fact, a huge amount of our decision-making is actually irrational. Maybe now you should actually ask yourself the question, why did you really join this masterclass? Do you even know? And if you actually look at, and now I'm deviating from the script here, but if you look at, say, some of the work, I can't pronounce his name. I'll put it in an email or something. Some psychologists, they've spoken a lot about how we have these 7 mental states in our limbic system that is playing a huge role in our decision making, like most of our huge decision making. And those 7 are, now this is a test of my memory, disease avoidance, protection against physical harm, social connectivity, mate attraction, mate retention, status, and kin care. So and our brain, if you look at the global economy, you'll actually find that the biggest brands are all focused on either 1 or 2 of those 7 mental states. And so when we understand that, we suddenly look at, oh, hang on a minute, in which case things like, user stories, these are, in psychology, we could refer to them as proximate motives, very superficial motives that a user would want to do something. But actually, there are these more profound or fundamental motives that is actually the driving force that's really sustaining a particular behavior. All right. How am I doing so far on the pace? Because I realize I'm throwing a lot of information out there, and that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's able to hold it.
I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Okay. Kamalish. Okay. Yeah. Andrés. Fantastic. Si quieres hago otra versión en español, Andrés. Sorry. live in Spain, so I
Got
should be
the
able to do
wine
this.
thing.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Right. So back to the screen. Dun-dun-dun. Which then brings me on to the three ingredients to all human behavior. And the three I want to use are actually by Dr. BJ Fogg. Why? Because if you are brand new to psychology, to human behavior, right? If you're brand new, you go, well, where do I start? Do I start with the classics, which is how I started back in the 90s? Don't want to give my age away there. But when I first started studying psychology, it was all the classics. It was just basically every day, read another 30 to 40 pages, write an essay, blah, blah, blah. Maybe this is something that Firuze can relate to. And and that was basically welcome to university studying psychology. But if you don't want that, the boring classics, and you go, give me the latest ways to understand human behavior, then this is fantastic. So it works like this. So Dr. BJ Fogg talks about these three ingredients that must come together at the exact same time. And if one of those ingredients are missing, then the behavior cannot happen. And the way he presents it is actually in a visual format, which is why I love it. So the way it works is this. You have these three ingredients, which is the right level of motivation. Now, there are lots of types of motivation. We don't need to do that for today, but just think, we all understand what is motivation at a basic level. So you need the right type of motivation. You need the right ability or capability if you're using the combi model. So you need to be able to do the behavior. Can I physically, mentally, financially, or whatever, does my environment allow me to do the behavior, right? And I need a prompt or a trigger or a cue, something that says, hey, do the behavior. Now, that could be something really simple like the rumble in your tummy or the vibration of your phone as your friends buzzed you or something, right? Or it could be when you open your phone, you're seeing like a red dot with with a number in it. Then you know that there's some sort of update, right? These are all cues or prompts. But just because you have a cue or a prompt or a trigger, it doesn't mean you go and do the behavior. It's just letting you know, hey, now could be a good time to do the behavior. If you need to go to the bathroom, but you're in the middle of a presentation, you get the prompt, hey, go to the bathroom, but you don't, because the ability says, no, this is really hard for you to do right now because you're in the middle of the presentation. Okay. So just so we can get clarity on that, um, we need to understand that in BJ Fogg talks about this conceptual behavioral line that we need to cross, and we get enough of the both of the enough ability, as in it's easy enough for us to do, and enough motivation, we want to do it, then we all we need is the cue or the prompt, and we will actually do the behavior. But if one of those ingredients is lacking, then that puts us in the red zone. So we're less likely to do, or we're not actually, in his framework, we're not going to do the behavior. It's just going to be too hard. We're just not motivated. So let's use, I'll ask everybody here in the group. So let's start with, because you haven't got your cams on, I don't know if you're actually here or you've actually gone to the bathroom. So Firouzeh, I don't know why I'm trying to pronounce it with a French accent, but
Hi.
give us an example of something that you love doing, so you're highly motivated to do, but you find extremely hard.
Oh, that's a big question. I think maybe consistently meditating every morning. I find that quite hard. I found it easier when I'm on the apps like Headspace or Calm, and it gets me into a routine. But as soon as my trial or my subscription expires, the behavior has just gone out the window.
All right. Okay. So so you're highly motivated to do it, but if
Yeah.
you don't have the app, it suddenly becomes extremely hard. So there could be a
Yeah.
break of your routine or whatever's going on, or maybe you don't get the cues coming in to remind you, like maybe Calm or Headspace
Yeah.
does, it notifies you.
Yeah.
So even if it could be part of your routine, the prompt is missing, and therefore one of the ingredients is missing, and you fail at doing the behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Excellent. Excellent. So let's choose next on my screen is Richard's. So Richard, something you find super easy, but you actually just don't like doing it.
Oh. Hmm. I don't know. What's super easy that I don't like doing?
Well, a clue is typically, yeah, go on, go on.
Oh, I was just thinking, you know what? I was just in the kitchen cleaning the worktops because we've got these. Sorry, I've got a terrible reflection in my glasses. It's put me off. It's got all these stains on it because it's a new quartz top, and so I've been super worried about since we got it getting stained. So it's really easy to do, but then I have to go. I look at it and go, oh no, I need to do that again.
All right. But as long as it's easy. So here the thing is cleaning the work surface, even though your motivation to keep cleaning it is quite low, you find it very easy to do. That's
Yes.
the question. And if you say
Yeah, I don't want to have to do it every day. It seems like I have to do it every day.
right. Okay, perfect. Normally cleaning dishes, emptying the dishwasher, you know, taking the laundry, taking the stuff out of the washing machine and hang it on the line. These are things we all know how to do, but we just we look at it and go, oh God, it's a task I've got to do. We don't want to do it. Motivation pretty low. Right. Okay. Kamalesh. I put it with Valesh. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but
That's
so
right,
the question,
Kamalesh.
Kamalesh. Okay. Question for you is something you hate and you find really hard to do as well. It's probably something you don't do as a consequence.
Oh gosh, probably networking. I'm
Okay.
kind of an introvert, which explains the camera off.
Don't worry. Don't worry. Okay. So you hate networking. So you hate it. So motivation pretty much close to
Very
zero.
low.
You find it hard, perhaps.
Yeah, quite hard. Unless I'm truly forced to do it because of work engagements, I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, great. So it's in the hard. So we find it hard to do. So we don't do it as a consequence. So even if I say, so you said it, you know, if maybe a friend says, oh, you should go networking tonight, your motivation goes, nope. And you go,
Nope.
actually, it's quite hard and I really don't like it. I don't feel comfortable or whatever. So that's hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, excellent. And next up, Andres, you're next on my screen. So now something that you find really easy, you love doing it. So it's probably possibly something you do a lot.
But I don't have enough motivation, or that.
You love it. Something you really enjoy doing.
Okay. So I think it will be like you can see here. I love my plants, so every single day I take care of them, I water them, and I do it like joyfully. So that's something I do really easy, and my motivation is high as well because I consistently see the results. So maybe that could be.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So we've got these four, right? So I know we're simplifying behaviors to say, oh, there's only four types. No, the point is actually we can sit anywhere at any time on this map. So if you look at, say, Richard and cleaning the work surface, there might be a time when you're not motivated, but then maybe there's a time when suddenly maybe a friend's coming around and you're proud, you're feeling proud, and suddenly you're really highly motivated to say, look, I'm really excited. I really want to show you this brand new quartz top. So now your motivation actually goes up. And the thing about motivation is you have to think of it as like a variable. So your motivation to do anything can change from day to day or moment to moment. So think of it as like a yo-yo, right? So if you imagine you're going to, say, the gym. Day one, New Year's resolution. Day one, I'm going to hit the gym or whatever it is you've got for your New Year's resolutions. Yay! And you go do it. Day two, you can hardly walk because you haven't been to the gym in 6 months and you've forgotten how painful the experience is and you overdid it. So now if someone says, do you want to go to the gym again? Your motivation suddenly drops, right? And so we have this yo-yo effect. So which then leaves us with a situation. You say, okay, well, that's humans and that's human behavior. I get it. So now if I were to bring it into, say, behavioral design into a business context, so my customers, my users, or my patients, well, which one of these, imagine each one had its own persona group. So we had one persona group that wants to do something but find it too hard. We've got another group that finds it easy but really couldn't give a crap about doing it, right? So we're seeing these different persona groups or different patients in different pockets. We say, okay, well, which ones do we focus on first? Now, my argument, and this isn't from BJ Fogg, but this is mine, and I suspect he would possibly be aligned with this idea, is, I actually want to ask you that question, is which one? Do we go for the one at the top left? Do we go for the one the red one? Do we go for the other yellow, bottom right? Or do we focus on the green? So if we could only focus on one persona group, which ones would we prioritize? That's the question.
Can I come in with which one we'd maybe not go for?
Oh, you rule breaker. Okay, go for it.
I maybe won't go for high motivation, high ability, because I'd assume they perhaps are doing it anyway, if I have that insight. So I'd probably avoid those guys, and I'd maybe not start with the low motivation, low ability. So somewhere in the middle, that's the group I'd go for, but I don't know.
All right. Okay, good. Anybody else? So Camilla said green.
I think I will focus on the.
Oh, go
I
for
think
it.
I will focus on the yellow ones, because there are behaviors or that you can help change. The green one is in the right place, and the red one is going to be hard because.
Yeah.
I
So
was just going to add to that as well. I would focus on the green and the yellow that's high motivation. So the two at the top would be my priority.
interesting. Okay, so this is now my opinion, but this is based on too many years experience trying to figure this out and making my own errors too. Huh? I'm not going to claim it like, oh, I'm so brilliant. No, I've screwed this one up a lot of times too. And the conclusion's been consistent, has been consistently this. Why this one? So the green, so imagine say a banking app. So I've worked for a few different banks and financial institutions, including American Express and for the people in the UK, for NatWest. And I had a team of, for NatWest, about 21 people working with me at NatWest. And here's the thing, when you want to keep the greens happy. So if you change your product, your experience, or your design, or whatever, and you start moving things around, you might suddenly discover the greens get upset, because now you're suddenly making what was easy for them to do now suddenly becomes harder for them to do, because they're trying to figure something out. Have you ever been to the supermarket and they've got to move things around on the different aisles? And you're going, hang on a minute, where's the bread gone? And now you're all like, oh, for God's sake. And you're running around trying to find bread, and they've moved it to aisle 3 instead of aisle 1 or whatever it is, right? We've all had that experience, but imagine for a banking app, you do that. Well, how easy is it for you to now find that? So we know we want to keep the greens happy. So we're going to be very careful about whatever changes we're going to make to the design or the experience without losing the greens. But if they are already highly motivated, for whatever their reasons, hopefully it's intrinsic reasons, but whatever their reasons, it doesn't really matter. We just want to make it so easy for them to do that on the days that they don't want to do it, they can do it. So I'll give an example. When I was working, I worked with a small group. It was a short project, like I think 3 weeks. It was a few years ago now. Maybe it was a month max. And it was working with a group of patients who are undergoing chemotherapy. Now, I don't know if you know anyone who's ever undergone chemotherapy, but one of the common traits is feeling lethargic, feeling sometimes nausea, yet the doctors say, oh, it's really important that you keep up your muscle mass. It's important that if you keep exercising in any way you can. like, that's all good and well. And that knowledge doesn't make behavior change. And it can help, but it doesn't. Otherwise, there'll be nobody would ever smoke, right? And I've worked in smoking cessation, and trust me, they all know it's bad. But in the case of the chemotherapy patients, they were like, yeah, but my motivation to go to the gym is on the floor. You know, some days I'm like halfway, some days I'm at zero. So we looked at it and said, well, what is the easiest behavior that you could do consistently? What is consistently the easiest behavior? And they would decide, not me, I wouldn't tell them, but typically they might say, oh, preparing my gym bag, putting my gym shoes by the front door, looking at an app, like a health app, and getting that feedback on where their health is. That might act as an external motivator, and that might act as a prompt to make them think, oh, actually, yeah, I am making progress. And that might, help them move to the next stage and actually go and do the behavior. But ultimately, it was like this. Now, I've worked with lots of different companies over the past where the first thing they say to me is, Gary, because they know I've got a history working in the gambling industry, the first thing they say to me is, oh, we want people to be addicted to our app. Now, firstly, I'm very anti that as a brief. And secondly, I'm like, well, why is that important? They said, because we want to maximize on user engagement. And I said, well, why don't you maximize on making people want to use it, not from motivational, but because it's so easy to use that no other alternative makes sense to them. Like this, you literally created the easiest path to achieve their goals. And then you say, okay, but they say, oh, but we wouldn't like Duolingo or things like that. We'll get to Duolingo in a second if we've got time. But I'm always against that. And I'm saying, let's focus less on say extrinsic, external motivations like goals and badges and leaderboards and things like that, like gamification. And let's focus more on helping them achieve their goals. And so this is why after 27 years, I said, you know what, just keep it like this. If you do keep it like this, you're going to get more customers engaged more often. And that's what we all want, but they're going to be happy customers. Okay, good. So this is a summary. We're not going to go into detail for today because of the time, but the motivations that BJ Fogg refers to are things like pain and pleasure, hope and fear, and his abilities or capabilities are things like time, money, mental. So we tick through all of these, and the moment one particular item becomes hard, that affects us on where we sit on that scale, or affects your customers where they fit on that scale. All right. How are we doing so far? Was that okay? Was that clear? Let me know in the chat or audio. Yeah, Andres, you got that? Good. All right, good. Now you can. Yep.
No,
okay.
everything fine. Yeah, crystal clear. Thanks.
All right, excellent. So you can use this if you look at, I mean, I'm using customers, but if you look at your stakeholders, your teammates, if you look at yourself and you say, why am I not doing the behavior I want to be doing? Okay. One of the simplest starting points you can do is just say, well, where am I sitting right now on the map in relation to that behavior? Right. And say, well, actually, I'm over here. Okay. So what do I need to do? Do I need to make this easier, or is this a motivation issue? Right. You've got a starting block. And the same can apply for your customers. If you've got kids, your partners, doesn't matter. You will see this. But what tends to happen is we are more likely to do the behaviors that are into the far top right, especially if they're short as well. So when you look at, say, the tasks you do, so you look at the tasks and you say, well, which task shall I do? I've got this really hard task or this really easy task. Well, don't be surprised if you go, oh, this one's quick and easy and I can tick it off my box on my to-do list. Don't be surprised if you keep doing those first. Why? Because you're more like that. Those ones are sitting more to the top right of the picture. All right. And that's why we tend to do those. Okay, good. This topic is obviously based on my entire career. So I love talking forever and ever about this, but we have to move on. So one big myth. Okay, so something that, for example, I get asked to give talks. I've also given keynote speeches. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona for Health 2.0. I gave one for health startups. I mentored a lot of startups in healthcare, and something I'm very passionate about. But sometimes people shy away from me when I say, oh, consumer psychology or behavioral design. I kind of interchange these words a little bit. They shy away because they think, oh, and gambling machines think, oh, it's just about manipulation. You're just there to manipulate. And if any of you have a background like Firuze, I hope you can testify in saying it's not about manipulation. We're generally trying to help people, and we're trying to figure out how do we help these different groups of people with their different challenges, and the different types of motivation. How do we do that? So, and actually a really fun, simplest way that I always think, and maybe you've already heard of this, is this technique that's referred to as the nudge. Okay, so this has been around for a little while. Richard Thaler, and I don't remember the other, Cassine, they wrote a book called Nudge. And the theory of nudge is really simple. It's just and think of it like this, is these baby steps, or these little, as they refer to these little nudges in an ethical direction. So it's not about manipulation. And by the way, have any of you ever seen this image? I'm sure most of you heard about nudging or nudge theory at some point, but have you ever seen this image?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. Anybody else? I'm going to go with no. Okay. So, okay, Andres has. So the story behind this actually came from in Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And you can actually go see them there. Not that I would say book a flight to go see these toilets, but should you be passing and male, then you can easily find these toilets. It turns out, right? And it turns out that the cost both from staffing, from repair work and environmental damage of men who keep missing the urinal and peeing on the floor is horrendous. Okay. So it also means they have to close off some of the cubicles, they've got to keep cleaning, and it just has all this cost and all these chemicals for cleaning. So the cost. And they said, so what could we do? Now, if you were to ask someone, so what can we do? Well, maybe you'd say, from a logical perspective, remember the humans with our irrational behaviors, from a rational perspective, you'd say, just make a bigger thing, or, something that we can't miss. But actually, this group, they said, well, actually, why don't we look at it from a nudge? How do we nudge you? And they said, by putting this little sticker of a fly, what do you think men suddenly started doing? Maybe anybody who identifies as a man is welcome to chime in and say,
aiming better.
Aiming better, right. Suddenly, even though you're jet lagged and whatever, and you're in a hurry and you're stressed about missing your flight, suddenly you go, I've got a goal, I've got an objective, and you start aiming and you get distracted. And so they didn't need to change the designs of any of these cubicles. They just needed to add a little sticker. Now, I've been told that in the US, you can also get stickers of Donald Trump's face in toilets to help, depending on your political lenience, you can then have a new target to aim for. But that's the power of nudging. So when we think about behavioral design, we don't need to think about, and we think about behaviors, we don't need to sometimes go too crazy. Sometimes it's about keeping it small, keeping these nudges. And I think that's part of what I hope to convey to anyone who's thinking it's about manipulation. Is this manipulation? Maybe. But the point is about nudge theory is you have free choice. For a nudge to be a correct nudge, i.e. not a deceptive design, it has to be, you have to have free choice, an easy choice, and it has to be, pushing you towards an ethical decision. So maybe you've heard of, say, in other nudge theories, things like optional auto opt-ins. So that's a classic example that's used. For example, if I believe, so a government, an example in the book Nudge, they use that a lot, which is the example of organ donations, right? So if you're in an accident, automatically the government has subscribed you to donate your organs, but your family has free choice to still say no. And they get asked, hey, listen, can we use Richard's eyes, ears, and whatever else they've discovered is useful for the next generation or whoever? And Richard's partner might say yes or no, right? So that's the ethical, but it's an optional, and you have that free choice for that to be a nudge. Right, that then brings me on to, and this is actually why I'm actually giving this masterclass in the first place, is because my colleague was just doing some light research, right, on LinkedIn, and you can go and do the same research today. You go into LinkedIn, you go into the search bar, and you type in your job title. And then you see the results. So you can kind of see how many people, and if it's a job title like service design, like it's 2 words, then put it in speech marks. And you'll see how many people with your job title. Right, okay, great, there's 1 million and whatever. But now if you then add the word "and" in capital letters, and then you put, say, psychology or sociology or anthropology, and the list goes on, you suddenly discover that the numbers suddenly change. And remember, Don Norman at the very beginning said that the key about this is about this deep understanding of humans. And if we know that business schools and design schools are not teaching the deep understanding, then you start to realize that we have, as an industry, as an innovation industry, we have a huge problem. And these are the results that we did, or that my colleague found, is those, so product managers, those in UX, those in marketing, customer experience, service designer, user researcher, etc. And we had a huge list, but essentially it was saying, and I found this, a user researcher, so a researcher, only 10% actually have any formal studies. In fact, it's not even formal studies. It's having the word psychology in their entire description. And that means 90% don't. And I've read those books on user research, and they don't tell you how to decode the reflection part. It's just it's just creating affinity maps. Affinity maps is just an affinity map. You still need to have skills and knowledge and ways to understand what it is you're looking at. So you made an affinity map. So what? And then that then brings on to what I'm doing is I decided for 2025, I'm going to create an online academy that does exactly that. So this is the sales pitch part. I hope you stick around for 30 seconds. I'm basically created these cohorts, essentially creating what I've learned over 27 years are the frameworks you need to know, the frameworks that consistently, regardless of the industry, whether you're working in healthcare or whether you're working in banking, the frameworks and the techniques that allow you to decode human behavior and also allow you to design ethical experiences based on behavioral science. So if you think like, behavioral economics, you think about, this is now for Fizz. Sorry, I can't get your name right. Things like the trans-theoretical model of behavior change. It's about all these different models, but only the ones that are really consistently reliable, that people in UX or people in strategy or service design are going to use, and they're easy to remember and apply and make a real impact in their jobs. So that's why I'm teaching, creating a couple of cohorts. In fact, we've actually got one starting next week. I know for you guys, that's possibly a bit too late, and it's pretty full as it is already. But you're more than welcome to check them out for future reference if you actually think your journey you'd like to continue on. Now, questions. You've been quite quiet. As a group, you've been quite quiet. But over to you guys. I'd like you to, let me stop the share. What will you remember the most?
I quite enjoyed the curve as a really interesting way of looking at you know, where you center your you know, which customers to look after first. I've you know, expressed a similar sentiment to that, and you know, in many ways, and lots of you know, my particular area of, you know, that I work in is content design, so it's specifically about making things as easy, you know, reduce those motivational barriers, but also, you know, look into why people are there in the first place. What are they there to do? Trying to combine that need or want with the content that you've got in front of you and what the business need is, and finding that magic in the middle. So you know, this is, you know, close stuff that's close to my heart.
Yeah, you might find, just as you know, if you're in further reading, and it is something I teach, but I'm not saying you have to sign up to my course, but if you want to just take your own path, there's a really good book you might like, which is this one, which is, I'll put on the screen. Is that the right? Oh, there you go.
Oh, there we are. Yep.
So
I've got that one on my list to buy, actually. So awesome.
okay.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I
nice
mean,
one.
essentially, I'm not saying there's a YouTube video with it on, but I wouldn't be surprised because it's a lot of examples to get through. But for you, you might find, look, just knowing that there are two systems and that the front of the part of the brain, you know, the one that has to do all the processing, you know, is very conscious. It's a slow machine, you know, has to sit down and do maths, and there's noise on in the background. It can't concentrate. But if you think about looking at your website and content, well, imagine they've also got their earphones on, or they're in an office and there's noise happening.
Yes.
And they're trying to read your screen, your content for the first time. And that's why they talk so much about dumbing down the language, which part of me feels like, oh, that's so sad. They're so sad that we have to literally write everything like you're talking to a 5-year-old. That's kind of sad because especially English has so many words, but people have so much other distractions on at once that they won't be able to
Yeah.
process it well. And then the next easiest behavior that they're most motivated to do will be the one that they end up going for. And you go, ugh. So, you know,
Yeah, I tend to like push more towards, you know, super simple language that's really super, you know, super clear. But
yeah,
you know, I think it's you know, it's a real art to be able to say something simply and get across the meaning, and you know, it's a real skill. I think people think it's easier than it is. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's definitely interesting stuff.
How
Thank you.
about, thank you. And how about the others? Andres?
Yeah, I like a lot the first part in which you mentioned that this design thinking process and behavioral design process and everything, it's most the same. Like it's not exactly the same, but it follows the same rules, no? And I love that fact because in the company I work for, they are constantly kind of trying to change the way they work, but at the end for me it's like you are doing exactly the same and you just putting new names in order to have like this engagement for the new movement, let's say. Is I think easy for the people to understand how to accept these new processes. It's new that is by heart the same, no? They, of course, I have like some small changes, and of course they are not like copy pasting the past version of the methodology. They
Yeah,
have like some improvement, but in the core they respond to the same steps, no? And I think that was like incredible. I feel like I'm not the one crazy that that they think that way. So for me that was kind of the first highlight I take for this class, because yeah, it's something I was figuring out in the past, and happy to see that I am not alone.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. And Firuze.
Hi. So as you pointed out at the start, Combi would be my bread and butter. Very familiar with that. And I also really like to use the EAST principles from
Yes.
the Behavioral Insight team in my work. But the MAP model isn't something I really use a lot. So it was really interesting to find out a little bit about that. And you can see how a lot of it would map onto Combi, etc., like some of the detail underneath it. But I've been thinking of it in terms of when I'm talking to other teams in my organization and training individuals, sometimes Combi could go a bit too technical. It's too much. And actually thinking about segmenting audiences and thinking about which ones are the ones you could prioritize above the others. I think that was really a different way of looking at it than how I would have approached it. So yeah, I really, really like that kind of layer of looking at it in that lens, I guess.
Yeah, that's really interesting to say that. Yeah, I think the Combi is good for the workers to do the work, but when you have to communicate to others, I find the FOG model, just stakeholders who don't have your knowledge.
Exactly.
They just go, look, just make it easy for me to understand who we're looking at, why, and where we want to take them.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, great. Now over to you to figure it out. I mean, the Combi, there's also an app. I've even got the app actually. I think it's something like 108 different types.
The taxonomy.
Yeah, the taxonomy. Yeah. And then, you've got all that and you look through it and you go, okay, there's so many that it's a rabbit hole that you can just become a specialist just in that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And actually the EAST, you can add an F, which is the feast, which you add fun to.
Okay.
That was actually from Tala said that. That was his recommendation.
Interesting, because I think of the fun with the gamification and making something attractive, but actually thinking of it as a separate part of the acronym, that could be a good way to like highlight that as a key kind of ingredient. And again, it maps back to the MAP model, which talks about pleasure, doesn't it? So yeah, I guess for me, it's always interesting to see the different range of models out there and how you could use that to communicate it to stakeholders who are maybe not experts in this stuff in a very quick way.
Yeah, I actually am against, and this sounds crazy. So I think for anyone who's coming from, say, UX, service design, like strategy, that sort of territory, so the innovation side, I'm actually against them learning the Combi because there were other frameworks that I feel that they would be far better at and be far more successful at than somebody specialized in, say, Combi. And I'm not saying Combi is science, but it's a rabbit hole. And, and I just say, look, if like the TTM, the transferential model of behavior change and things like that, you're going to be because that's actually quite similar to, say, a customer journey map or a user flow. You say, well, hang on a minute, I can quickly adapt that. I can quickly figure that out. Oh, so I just need at each stage, figure out how can I get them to transfer from one place, what like pre-contemplation to contemplation, like that step look like. And so I found, like I said, from experience teaching it, that they're the frameworks that people go, I know how to use that and it makes sense. And so I think it's best to to help people be successful with those other frameworks. So yeah. All right. Well, that's it. Our time is up. I hope you've enjoyed it. Like I said, we covered the behavioral model, little things about it's not about unethical manipulation, but it's about little nudges. Sometimes that's all it takes. And also that the process and the framework can fit into anyone in innovation with your regular processes. All right.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I really enjoyed it.
A real pleasure to meet you guys. Okay. Feel free to reach out, whatever it is you've got going on. And yeah, let's keep in touch.
I will do. Thank you. It's fascinating stuff. Thank you.
All righty. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers.